There are clearly many ways to put up a tunnel tent, some considerably better than others. I'm Magnus Collin. If you watch this video and are lucky, you might in fact learn something. Everyone's responsibility is no one's responsibility. So when working on a multi-person tent, it's a good practice to divide the responsibilities. One is for the stakes. This tent comes with 19 stakes and you should leave with 19 stakes. This specific model is Robens Voyager Versa 4. Another responsibility is to take care of the sacks. These should be fixated to the rucksack at all times so that they don't blow away. A good practice is to leave the tent like this. When you're pitching the tent, your main consideration is the wind. So when facing the wind, I have the right corner sticking out. This allows me to pitch the tent very fast. It allows me to know how the tent is located, and it prevents the tent from blowing away. A second thing, you should clip the stakes into the main buckle so that you can pull these ones out immediately. Otherwise, it's a great risk that you lose them when you start pitching. In summer conditions, you can roll the poles inside the tent if you find it easier to pack that way. In winter time, it's better to keep both the stakes and the poles separately so that you don't lose them in the snow when you are taking the tent out. I start pitching the right corner and I keep the stake at a 45-degree angle. Now when it's fixated, I can start pulling the tent out. And as soon as I get the second corner, I fixate that. Now it's possible to pull the rest of the tent out, keeping track of the poles. This is a good point to clip the bags into the backpack. Often the poles are color coded in one way or another, which correspond to the relevant slot on the tent. Sometimes the sticks are symmetric, sometimes they have a different end. So keep track of these so that you are putting the rounded end into the channel in the tent. Most tunnel tents have a lower front end. This is the direction that you should pitch in the wind direction because it's stronger. Normally this also makes the opening end up in the rear or somewhat to the side, so that you are protected from the wind when entering the tent. These also avoid the snow from coming in the winter. Also make sure that the poles are properly seated. If you start bending them when they are not properly seated, they will break. So slowly open the sticks properly and make sure that they are fully seated before inserting them. Work from the front and backward. This way you can move the fabric while you're working so that you are not walking on the fabric. Repeated walking on the fabric will break the tent. It's very important that the poles are fully seated in the relevant pockets before you start stretching the fabric. Otherwise, it will become much more difficult to attach the pole in the relevant pocket, and it's also a risk that you break the pole. Tunnel tents are very easy and convenient to pitch because in essence only 4 stakes are needed to pitch it. 2 in the front and 2 in the back. So now when you have inserted all the poles, you make sure to take the rearmost stake holes and you stretch the tent out and make sure that you get a good tension on the tent. You can of course adjust these more carefully afterwards, but already now make sure that you have the basic tension on the tent. You should avoid all types of sogging because it will make the tent more vulnerable in the wind. Now you can use the rest of the stakes to stretch out the guidelines. The longer you keep the guy lines, the more force they have. Try to look at the best orientation for the guy lines, but normally a 45-degree angle will give the best wind resistance. And basically you can see from the guy line orientation how it should be pulled to give the best wind protection. When inserting the poles, it's very important that the pole is fully seated into this pocket. Different tents have different lock mechanisms for the poles. This particular one has a clip with a hole so that the pole is inserted into the hole. If needed, this string can be tightened, but it's important that you release it before you try to take out the pole. Make sure that all ventilation openings are properly open so that the wind can flow freely. The guy lines are very important to protect the tent from the wind and from heavy snow and rain, because it keeps the tent stretched. On the other hand, it's normally not necessary to fixate the footprint with additional stakes. In fact, I've been in quite a few storms and I've never had to do it so far. So as long as you pitch the 4 corners and you are careful with the guy lines, this will be a very strong tent that can take a lot of wind and rain and snow. To be honest, weather is kind of chilly. It's raining and quite miserable. So this is when you enjoy outdoor the most. Now we're going to look into how to use the tent properly. When you're opening doors and closing doors, do that fully so that you don't rip the zipper when you're trying to push yourself out. Don't leave these flying in the wind, because if you're walking on it, it will break. And a broken door when you're out on the mountain is a truly bad idea. Instead, you roll it and you use these toggles to fixate the door. In the tent, you try to keep this main area clean. This way people don't fall over things when they are moving around and try to get out at night when it's dark. For this reason, you should store your backpack in the following way. You take it and you push it as far as it can go in this direction, and you leave it with the opening toward you, so that you have easy access to the content in the rucksack, but at the same time you get the rucksack away. You also make sure that the carry system is upward. This way it keeps dry and free of dirt. Concerning the clothes, wet clothes stay here up on the rucksack. Dry clothes you take in the tent and use as a pillow. It's a bad idea to take wet clothes inside the tent because you risk ruining your dry sleeping bag. The best way to dry the wet gear is to bring it out in the sun in the day, or take it on in the morning and walk it off with a smile. It's a good practice to leave the toggle for the inner tent at the top in 12 o'clock position. Then everyone knows this and don't need to look for the toggle when they need to go out quickly in the middle of the night when it's dark. A very important thing in the tent is to maximize the ventilation. For this reason, you should make sure that you remove any fabric that is unnecessary in the inner tent, so that you only have the mosquito net left. When it comes to the exterior opening, there are two ways. If you are few people sleeping in the tent and it's windy, it might be enough to open a partial opening here, like so. But this is only for ventilation. When you are going out, don't be tempted to pull down and walk out this way. It's a very big risk that you will rip this sooner or later. Instead, always use the door as intended. If you need to increase the ventilation even further, it's a good practice to open the rear. By opening like this, you get a very good ventilation. Keep a microfiber cloth in the stake bag. This cloth have three main purposes. You can use it on a daily basis to clean out the inner tent, to keep this pristine, four-season sweet sensation. Secondly, you use this to clean the stakes when you're taking down the tent. And finally, you use this to keep over the pointy edges of the stakes. This way you prevent poking hole in the stake bag and in the main tent bag. When it's time to take down the tent, it's done in the reversed process. The first thing you do is emptying the tent. Don't try to pack inside the tent. If you are a number of people, it will take forever and become a big mess. Instead, you take out all the gear as quickly as possible outside the tent. You place the things on your sleeping mat and you pack as quickly as possible. The first one ready will then start to clean out the floor on the inner tent so that it's clean and nice for your next time you pitch the tent. Only in really bad weather do you try to do the packing inside the tent. Next thing is to properly close all the doors. Make sure that the doors are always closed all the way down. Otherwise, when you're pitching or using the tent, they can rip open in the wind. After closing the door, you start to take down the tent by going from rear to front. If it's not so windy, you can take down all the guy lines, and then the rear ones and the spikes in the front. That's the last thing you are taking out, and that should not happen until you have packed the tent inside the bag. If it has been raining a lot or snowing, shake the poles a little bit before letting the tent down. This way you get rid of some excess water and snow. If the wind is strong, you will keep this one. If it's not so strong, now is the good point to take it out. But you are still leaving this one, and you are still leaving that one. And also when taking out the poles, you start from the rear. It's important to push, not pull, so that you are holding onto the last part of the pole, because if you start to pull in between sections, they will split and the whole thing will get stuck into the channel and create a big mess that takes long to sort out. So push, don't pull. And when taking out the pole like this in an orderly fashion, you are also able to move the fabric around so that you are not walking on it. Now is a good point to take away excess water if you forgot to do it before. Also make sure that there is no dirt on the floor, sticks or any other sharp object, and make sure that all the guy lines are inside the tent so that they don't stick out and get tangled. In winter time, you would typically start from the rear and start shoving these in. This way you avoid too much snow to get inside, and you are able to work a bit higher and shake out the snow as you push more and more fabric in. For beginners and for summertime, it's easier to store the poles inside and to roll it together. Now you have the whole tent under control and you have the knee on it. Now is the good time to take out the final stake. So here we are with the tent, with the right corner sticking out. Trust is good, control is better. So the final thing you do before you pack this is that you are recounting this one, making sure that they are clean before putting them back into the sack. And you make sure that this one is attached to the main buckle so that you can easily find it when it's time to pitch the next time.
As nice as it gets in the winter time.
If you like this video, please give a thumbs up, leave a comment, subscribe. Thanks for watching. Stay frosty.